You're listening to The Observing Eye. Pirate radio for the mind. Coming at you fresh from the computer hell cabin.
Hello, you beautiful lot. It's Friday, the 8th of December, 2023, and you are listening to episode 42 of The Observing Eye. If you're new, welcome aboard, and if you're returning, welcome back. As always, I like to begin these episodes with a brief moment of reflection. So, let's take a moment to consider the good things that have happened this week. And now a moment for the not so good. 42 episodes. Where has the year gone? We started this back in January of this year. And I've missed, tried to do one a week, missed a couple, but we're here. We're at episode 42. And what a ride. What a ride it's been. The runaway train, that is the Observing Eye podcast. Thank you all for joining me today. Today we are going to be talking a little bit about discipline yourself, and diving into that, but from a philosophical angle. I like to bring philosophy into these things. So we're going to be looking at discipline and philosophy and how the two intertwine and what we can learn from some of these old philosophies about self-discipline, not disciplining ourselves. There's a distinct difference. This is not a self-flagellation podcast. So putting that piece of birch down for a moment, let's spend a bit of time going through how some of the various philosophies through history, including some religions, have dealt with the idea of self-discipline. And I include religions in this because I think there's a lot of philosophy and some important ideas we can learn from religion as well. So we're going to include that in this episode. Let's begin with Confucianism then. So Confucianism comes from the philosophies of the great Chinese sage Confucius, who was kicking around in about 500 BC. Now, Confucius is a very important figure in philosophy in general, not just in Chinese philosophy, as his teachings still underpin a lot of East Asian culture. He talks about ethics. He talks about filial piety. He was heavily involved in politics and the state and the structure, the social structure and hierarchies. He's a fascinating historical figure. And if you are interested in learning a bit more about Confucius, you can take a look at his Analects, which are a collection of his writings that are fascinating to read if you're so inclined. But I'm gonna leave that there. No more talk of Confucius as the man. Let's talk about how Confucianism affects self-discipline and what ideas it has around that. Now, Confucius taught that self-discipline was a means to achieve moral virtue and social harmony. So he talks about the ideas of Ren, which are benevolence or our humanness, and Li, which is proper behavior. There's a lot of like ritualness. Ritualness? Is that a word? Ritualness? We're going to go with it anyway. Ritualness to the practices. So for Confucius, self-discipline was crucial in creating personal virtue, which in turn was essential for maintaining a harmonious society. So he believed that if everybody was self-disciplined, then we could work together and create a good culture, a good society in which all of us could live and benefit from. And I have to say, personally, I don't see any issue with that whatsoever. I think it's a really valid point. If we all worked on ourselves, if we all were self-disciplined, I think society would become a much more harmonious space in which we can all exist. But that's my 2 pence. And I'm just going to park my 2 pence right there. Moving on then, let's have a look at Buddhism and what Buddhism has to say around self-discipline. Now, I should know a little bit about this, being a Buddhist. But it's fundamentally self-discipline forms an integral part of one's entire practice as a Buddhist. We have this thing called the Eightfold Path, which fundamentally says that self-discipline is the key to achieving enlightenment. And that path, it includes things like right action, right speech, right livelihood, all of which require us to be self-disciplined to a reasonable extent, because we're having to be mindful and aware of how we're behaving and what we're saying to people, and to consider the things that are going on before we act upon them. Even in meditation practice, in the mindfulness practices that you may have come across yourself, the idea of self-discipline is integral to meditation. We are disciplining the mind to sit in a space with itself and to focus on something like the breathing, or upon a visualization or a mantra, for example. So there's a lot of discipline required to sit in that meditative state. And we'll go on, I'll talk a little bit about consistency and discipline later, but I'm just going to drop that in there as a Chekhov's gun. Well, it's not really a Chekhov's gun because I've talked about it, but you know what I mean. You know where I'm coming from. We're going to touch on that a little bit later in this episode. And how could I mention discipline without talking about the Stoics, the masters of self-discipline, Marcus Aurelius and his great dichotomy of control, of which there is a previous episode, if you scroll back down the podcast listing, where I talk all about the dichotomy of control for about 15, 20 minutes. So I'm not going to dive into Stoicism too much, because I'm going to repeat myself quite aggressively if I do so. But just to summarize from the perspective of Marcus Aurelius, he emphasized the importance of rational control of our emotions and desires to exercise like the wise mind. He believed in living in accordance with nature and virtue. He believed on focusing on what is within our control and accepting what is outside of our control. So for Stoics, self-discipline is about maintaining like an inner calm and inner rationality in the face of the external chaos that we are consistently bombarded by. Fundamentally, when we recognize that the only thing that we can control is ourselves, we can stop expending energy trying to control the external world, which means that we can channel that energy into ourselves and foster discipline through like consistency and habits and things like that, and putting that energy into something constructive that we can actually use. So that's the general idea of discipline within Stoicism. Let's fast forward a few thousand years. Then we've gone old school. Let's bring in the new wave. Let's get into Immanuel Kant. Kanty. You've come across Immanuel Kant, I imagine, in some shape or form. A great 18th century Enlightenment thinker. He wrote some absolutely mad shit. One of which was the doctrine of transcendental idealism, where he argues that space and time are mere forms of intuition that structure our experience, and the objects of our experience are simply appearances. I mean, it's craziness. It's great. It's fascinating, but it is not something I'm going to dive into in too much depth. What Kant does do is come at discipline from an interesting angle. So in a similar way to Confucius, Kant believes that duty and rationality are fundamental keystones of ethical behavior. And self-discipline requires acting in accordance to these universal maxims which we determine via reason. So it requires a disciplined adherence to our duty, regardless of our personal desires or emotions. So we're putting duty first, ethics before emotion. And we require self-discipline in order to do that. And again, I entirely agree with him on this. You know, I think we do require an input of energy to maintain a certain ethical behavior, because you know if we didn't inject energy into managing the chaos that goes on inside our heads, it would just descend into Planet of the Apes. We know it would. God damn it, you blew it all up. You know it would happen. Let's fast forward a little bit more then, not too much, to the world of the existentialists. Now, I'm not going to get too much into Jean-Paul Sartre because French nihilism is not my bag. However, Nietzsche had some interesting thoughts to say around self-discipline because these guys are all about individual freedom. They're all about being responsible for yourself. They were like the uber liberals back in the 19th century. These guys just totally into that stuff. So in the context of existentialism, self-discipline is about us as individuals making authentic choices to define our own existences. So it's a very sort of individual-based concept. However, discipline in this idea means that we have to accept that in order to have the freedom to choose for ourselves and to define ourselves authentically, there is a moral responsibility that comes with those choices. So it's discipline intertwined with being responsible for having so much freedom. Oh, the freedoms! It's we've got to be disciplined in our responsibility with that, because as Spider-Man says, with great power comes great responsibility. Well, it sounded more like Geralt of Rivia, to be honest, but it's the best I can do at short notice. And very lastly, I'm going to touch on the Aristotelian thoughts of discipline. I think it's going to move into our next piece not quite nicely. So Aristotle's concept of virtue ethics, he places a strong emphasis on self-discipline, nearly lost it there, as a means to achieve what was called eudaimonia. What a beautiful word, eudaimonia, which means flourishing life. So Aristotle argues that virtues, including discipline, are habits that are developed through practice. So self-discipline involves choosing actions that are a mean between the extremes of deficiency and excess. So everything in moderation, baby. That's what Aristotle was coming out about. But let's talk a bit about habits then. Let's talk a bit about habits developed through practice. Because I mentioned back when I was talking about Buddhism that meditation as a practice has to be consistent. And through that consistency, we evoke self-discipline. So if you're here trying to think of or find a way to improve the discipline in yourself, there are two things that I will say to that, based on all of the philosophies that we have covered in this episode. And with the distinct caveat, as with all of these things, this is what works for me. This is from my experience. This might not be quite exactly what works for you, but at least if I can give you some ideas, things you can try, then, you're never going to know if you don't try. So let's walk through some of this stuff. So first thing is getting uncomfortable. Now, I know this sounds a little bit odd, and I pull this out of a few of the older philosophies, particularly Stoicism. But if we can get used to being in a space where we are not entirely comfortable, then it helps to reinforce the idea of self-discipline, because it's really easy to be disciplined when everything's going great and, all of the ducks are aligned and everything on the desk is perfectly arranged and there's no cleaning to do and the children aren't screaming and, the dog hasn't taken the shit on the sofa. When everything is fine, it's really easy to be disciplined. We want to be disciplined when things aren't fine. We want to be able to evoke that self-discipline when things are challenging. And that's why we need to get comfortable being uncomfortable. Because if we can sit in that space of being uncomfortable, like a voluntary uncomfortableness, right? When we can sit in that space, it makes it so much easier for us to be disciplined when things genuinely are not going to plan. So get comfortable being uncomfortable. That's part one. Part two. And this is all it is, part one and part two. That's all it's going to be. Part two is be consistent. If you want to be a writer, then you write every day. If you want to be a content creator, then you do it every day. If you want to be like a master guitarist, you practice every day. If you want to lose weight and get strong and get fit, you train every day. These things have to be done consistently. It's no good just faffing about and being, I'll do this for like a couple of hours on a Tuesday and then I won't touch it for 2 weeks. And I'm horrified that I'm not a successful writer. Well, quelle surprise, of course you're not, because you're not consistent, because there's no discipline. So that's That's it. Be consistent. And if you can couple that consistency with being uncomfortable, then in no time at all, you will be doing these things consistently, habitually, without even thinking about it. They will just come into sort of nature, come into your nature, part of who you are and what you do. So just build those habits. Get uncomfortable and be consistent. Those are the two things I'm going to say. Out of all of the ancient philosophies, distilled down into two things. Get uncomfortable and be consistent. That's what I'm going to give to you. Obviously, there's a hell of a lot more to it than that. And I don't have the time, because I want to try and keep these podcasts fairly short, to dive into this in any more depth. But I'm hoping that I've given you a starting block so that if you want to dive into stuff, you know where to look, you know who to look for, and you've got some ideas. But seriously, for me, the best thing that worked was just getting into that space of just doing. Just do it. You know, stop strategizing. Was it paralysis by analysis? Just do the thing, do the work, make the habit happen. That's it. That's it's not simple. It sounds glib and it sounds simple. It's not, because there's all of those emotional resistances and things that come up, which are stopping us from doing it in the first place. So it's not just like, well, I'm just going to do this every day and it's going to be fine. No, it's going to be challenging because there's going to be emotional shit there that you've got to get through. And I can't help you with that, because this is just a podcast. This is a broadcast. This is not a conversation, sadly. But, you know, maybe drop me a comment if you're starting this stuff on the platforms upon which we exist, and we can have a conversation around it. Because I would, if I can support in any way with people that want to ask, then please do. I'm very happy to respond to comments and to talk to people about this stuff that we're putting out there. Which brings me on to, I guess, the end section of this podcast, where I'm going to say that's all I've got to say on discipline in this episode, and to thank all of you beautiful people for joining me today, for spending your time listening to a middle-aged Englishman prattle on about discipline. It's always lovely to have you here. And yeah, if you want to get involved in a conversation, we exist on, and I keep saying we, it's literally me at the desk. I don't know why I do that. We, the collective royal we. No, it's me. It's just me sitting here talking into a microphone. There's not even anyone else in the house right now. So yeah, I exist. This podcast exists on multiple platforms. So we're on Substack. That's our home. It's Substack, which is the observing I, letter I.substack.com. That's where all the writing happens as well. There's some writing stuff up there you can take a look at. So if you want to get the latest updates about everything, jump on the Substack. You can subscribe for free, and just you'll get updates and stuff about what's happening behind the scenes. YouTube, find us on YouTube, at The Observing Eye is the handle there, and we're also on TikTok and Instagram, equally the same handle, at The Observing Eye. So whatever your platform of preference, go and find us, go and find me and talk to me about these things, and yeah, let's have a conversation. As it's Friday, I just want to wish you all a wonderful weekend. Christmas is coming up really fast, and I have more shopping that needs to happen. And I'm not really paying attention to Christmas. I love it. I absolutely love this time of year. It's a great break, great breather. But I for whatever reason, I've not given it the same attention that I would normally. And it's like the 8th of December, and I've got presents to buy and things to organize and all sorts of stuff. So it's the last few weeks of chaos before I'm off for a fortnight. So I'm looking forward to that. And I hope you are as well. I hope you're going to get some time off and you're going to get a nice breather. And December is winding down for all of you. So yes, I hope it's a restful weekend for everybody. Wishing you all much love, and I will catch you soon.
You've been listening to The Observing Eye. Thanks for spending some time with me today. I hope that you found it useful. And if you're interested in any more of my writings or work around psychology and philosophy and general day-to-day living, please go and take a look at my Substack, which is theobservingeye.substack.com. i.substack.com, and that's I as in the letter, not I as in the gelatinous organ through which you see. Take care, everybody. Much love, and I'll see you soon.